I was watching a short on YouTube the other day around dopamine stores, and this short mentioned that we have a fixed amount of dopamine to use every day, which was interesting as this wasn't really how I understood dopamine to work. And so I wanted to look a little bit deeper into the neurochemistry to see how true this was. And the first thing to mention is that this statement as a whole isn't true. We don't have a fixed amount of dopamine to use up. Once we use dopamine, we can resynthesize it and then we can use it again. What I think this short was getting at was that this rate of resynthesis can change throughout the day. Let's dive into the science first because that makes the interpretation of this short a lot easier to understand. Dopamine levels fluctuate naturally throughout the day, tending to be a lot higher in the morning and then petering off as the day goes on. Now, dopamine is stored in these things called vesicles, and when this vesicle receives a signal from the brain to release dopamine, this could be in response to an action we've undertaken. This vesicle will fuse with a neuron cell membrane to release dopamine into the synapse, which is the gap between two neurons. And once this dopamine is released, it's not lost forever. Dopamine resynthesis and vesicle replenishment happen continuously throughout the day, but the rate of both will differ depending on a number of factors. The first is diet. You have to make sure that you're getting the right amino acids that are critical for dopamine production. The second is chronic stress, which has been shown to have an inhibitory effect. Interestingly, acute stress has been shown to have the opposite effect because acute stress is generally associated with those tasks that we find difficult or challenging, that dopamine is motivating us to complete because it's beneficial for our health in some way or another. The easiest way to differentiate between chronic and acute stress is chronic refers to long-term and acute to short-term. The most important factor, however, is going to be energy, as dopamine resynthesis is a very energy-intensive process. And so during the day, during active brain states, this will compete with other cellular demands for that energy, meaning that dopamine restoration, full dopamine restoration in those vesicles can take hours during the day. Due to high levels of competition, brain's doing all kinds of stuff to keep us alive, right? But when it gets to the night, the number of processes that our brain is engaged in decreases. There's less competition for this energy, and so dopamine synthesis doesn't take as long because it will have more energy that it can use for that process. Now, this hasn't been quantitatively proven, but if we take the fact that we have a lack of competition from other cellular demands, and the fact that sleep has been known to restore receptor sensitivity and to balance neurotransmitter levels, we can begin to draw those links ourselves. And so while we don't have a fixed amount of dopamine to use up every single day, when we simplify what's actually happening, I think it's a really good way to frame dopamine resynthesis. So what does this mean? Let's assume we've had a good night's sleep. And being that we know that dopamine resynthesis can happen theoretically a lot quicker at night, you're going to wake up with the highest level of dopamine that you will have during the day. And so when you wake up, you have a choice. You have two paths you can take. We've got the first path, which is going to be of sustained effort. This is going to include stuff like going to the gym, going to work, doing those household chores or odd jobs you've been putting off. Number one, this is going to mean that our dopamine is released a lot slower, so we're going to have a lot more readily available throughout the day. And number two, being that we do have these dopamine stores available, when we complete these tasks, we're going to get that feeling of reward, of accomplishment, that we might not get if we put these at the end of the day. Now, the second path we can take is doom scrolling, video games, social media, whatever it might be, the activities as a whole, if we could categorize this, that would sap our dopamine. And so what this means is that we will have hit after hit of novel stimulus and our dopamine would deplete incredibly quickly. So now let's look at both of these days side by side relative to the amount of dopamine that they use up. On the one hand, we've got our day of sustained effort. Let's say this is 3 hours of work in the morning. Once that 3 hours has elapsed, we have used up a fraction of our dopamine levels, meaning that we can carry this momentum forward throughout the rest of the day. We have much more dopamine to motivate us to do those difficult things. And on the whole, theoretically, we have a more productive day. Now let's look at the other hand. We've got 3 hours of doom scrolling to start our day. Not the best. At the end of that 3 hours, we've got so much less dopamine to draw from for other tasks throughout the day that it's very difficult to motivate ourselves and carry that momentum forward. And so in theory, we would have a much less productive day because we have much less dopamine to allow us to begin those tasks that require sustained effort. And we know two main things about dopamine. Number one is that it creates feelings of pleasure and satisfaction when we achieve something or experience something enjoyable. And number two is that it will motivate us to repeat those behaviors in the future. And so what this means is that whatever path you choose, in essence, you'll be creating a feedback loop that will carry forward to the following morning, and it will make it easier to start your day in exactly the same way. And so the point I'm getting at here is how you start your day is a good indication of how you'll finish it. Those decisions that you will make in the first 3 hours of the day will determine how much momentum you can carry forward for the rest of that day. And this isn't me saying start every day with 3 hours of meditation or a cold shower. Start that day however you'd like. But start it with something productive, something meaningful, something that's going to mean you can carry that momentum forward and be pleased with the day as a whole. Because the chances are that's going to carry forward into the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and so forth. Don't think too much into this, it really is that simple. Start your day the right way.